Hello and welcome to Castles and the Globe with Alessandro Dansambi and myself, John Rice. Today we are going to be talking about different types of morality and ethics. We're going to talk a little bit about utilitarianism with some of what Immanuel Kant wrote. We're also going to talk about virtue ethics. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, drawing from the ancient Greeks all the way up to now. And then as a little bit of a Catholic insight, we're going to bring in things like the principle of double effect to kind of close it out. Sandra, how are you doing?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Yeah. Episode 2. Let's get it.
Good to you. This is going to be exciting. I have my whiskey. I don't know if you're drinking anything, but
No, I'm not. That should be next time.
Alrighty. So yeah, let's start with Kant and utilitarianism. For those who don't know what utilitarianism is, it's a type of moral ethics, one of a couple different types of moral ethics, but it focuses on the max pleasure or good that can come from doing things. So when you are trying to decide what the right thing to do is versus the wrong thing to do, under utilitarianism, the right thing to do is that which produces the most good for the most people. A more formal definition of that is utilitarianism is the ethical doctrine that the moral worth of an action is solely determined by its contribution to overall utility, hence the word. And utility here is defined as happiness or pleasure, as opposed to suffering or pain. Utilitarianists really want to avoid suffering and pain as much as they can for what they call the greater good, being happiness or pleasure. And that's not necessarily the happiness and pleasure of one person. They're very clear that majority rules there.
It's not just a personal hedonism, right?
No, it's not. It's not a personal hedonism. They'd be totally willing to, like, let's say you have the example of the train is coming down the road, and on the path that it's on, it's going to kill 10 people. But if you change the path, it's only going to kill 3 people. Which one do you do? The utilitarianist is probably going to say kill the 3 people because the 10 people's good outweighs the 3 people's good. And Kant comes in with it with what he calls his 3 categorical imperatives. There is a 4th one, but we don't talk about that one too much. And the 3 imperatives, the kind of most important ones, are the formula of universal law, the formula of humanity, and the formula of an autonomy. And they come together in this categorical imperative. And what the formula of universal law is, this is actually the primary one. It's the most important one, but it's saying take any action that you do and universalize it so that it becomes a law of nature. So let's say if I was driving in the car and I was running late, so instead of stopping at the stop sign, I kind of did a rolling stop. If you take that action and you'd say like, well, okay, you just did it once, maybe there weren't any cars around, should be fine. But you're supposed to look at all these things through universal factors. So let's say I took that action and then said, so every time any person is driving through this stop sign, they should do a rolling stop.
Yeah, that would lead to mass chaos.
That would lead to mass chaos. So I should never do a rolling stop. Because if my action universalized would cause chaos or displeasure or would act against the good of the people, then I shouldn't do it even in the one case, because universalized it would become a larger case.
Okay, so wait, this is a way of saying like general morality, like lying, cheating, stealing. That's all bad because you can't have a society if everybody lies, cheats, steals.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's like a white lie, right?
Mm-hmm.
If everybody in society were to always give a white lie to a hard question, that would actually be problematic. You do sometimes need to give hard truths.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that, let's say, if any of our viewers are married, if your wife asks you if she looks fat in that dress, you should say yes. Otherwise, if universally everybody lied, then there'd be a problem. Doesn't matter how much it impacts you in the moment or the happiness of your marriage. You're doing it for the greater good. The next formula of is formula of humanity, and this one actually is of all of them probably the most Christian, and actually kind of almost disagrees with utilitarianism ends, but we're going to go with it anyway. Act so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or that of another, always as an end and never as a means only. This is actually really cool. If you read Love and Responsibility by Karl Wojtyla, he brings this up a lot. The person should never be a means to an end. The person is always an end to themselves. So when you're building these maxims and these rules for morality, you are still going for utilitarianism. You're still going for the good of the populace, but never using a person as a means to an end.
Right. You can kind of see that with the universal law, right? If you were to use everybody as a means to an end, that would undermine the good. Right?
Exactly. So a person has to be an end to themselves, and that's both the other and you. It very clearly lays out whether in your own person or that of another. So you yourself are also an end. So that's kind of cool. I like the formula of humanity, and that is the formula of autonomy. And the quote here is act as if you were, through your maxims, a lawmaking member of a kingdom of ends. So that kind of takes the universal aspect of, like, let's say I did that rolling stop. And if I assume that, well, if everybody does a rolling stop, then that's going to be problematic. The making it autonomous puts me in that place of having that ability to make that law. So if an act, I'm supposed to treat it that if an action I do could become law, would become law.
Okay.
So then you kind of just imagine, like, okay, if this small thing was a legal thing that everybody was supposed to do, what would happen? And it ties very much into the universal aspect, but it's a little bit nuanced and kind of helps compound it.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I actually think now, like, when I think about the autonomy one versus the universal law, I more think about the shopping cart example.
Okay, explain that.
I thought you might explain that because
Oh
you like.
wait, the oh yeah, the
Yeah, this is like your bread and butter. So you talk about this one.
so essentially it's what's the proper name? It's I think it's the universal law of shopping carts. It's the idea that a nation or a people or an individual is not capable of self-governance if they do not put their shopping cart away after they go grocery shopping, right? So the notion is like voting in sort of a self-governing society is simple, it's easy, it affects everybody else, not majorly, right? It's not like your vote necessarily changes anything, but just it adds up to affect other people. And you don't have to do it, right? So as a result, well, that voting shares a lot of the similar characteristics of just you go shopping, you fill up your shopping cart, you check out, you go to your car, you unload all your groceries into your car, and you have this shopping cart. You know, it's super easy to drive it away and put it into the little shopping cart stand or bring it back to the store, or you could just leave it in the parking lot. And if you don't have the moral character to put it away, then you don't have the moral character to actually vote. And the maxim pretty much says if you don't put your shopping cart away, you shouldn't be allowed to vote. Which
Yeah,
I don't disagree with. I would say.
but building on that, like, if you are thinking about yourself and acting as though your acts might become a law for the kingdom of ends, as Kant calls it, which is you're supposed to assume that, like, you're living in a kingdom where everything is an end to itself. So a kingdom of people that has these laws and stuff that go for these ends of good. If your action, you're supposed to treat your action as though it would become a law in this kingdom for ends. And would that be a good end or a bad end? If your action is to leave the shopping cart behind and not put it away, and that becomes the law of the land for this kingdom of ends, is that going to be a good thing or not? And sure, a lot of Kroger's employees would probably be annoyed if everybody just left their shopping carts in the middle of the road, and you'd have no place to park when you come into the parking lot. So put your shopping cart away.
And then nobody gets food and society collapses and angry,
Yeah.
hungry riots.
But some of this, some of the Kantian stuff, some of the utilitarian stuff actually is good and useful
Mhm.
in certain aspects. Um, I don't think it's a mode that you should stick to hard and fast.
Mhm.
It's not my preferred um,
Yep.
moral ethics stand, but there is a lot of good, especially with like when you're thinking government and stuff. There is a lot of good that can come from it. Um, the issue though is that it forgets the individual sometimes,
Yeah.
like the train.
It puts the universal law above that of humanity. Right?
Yes.
So sometimes I think if you have the person being an end in themselves above the or comes into conflict with the idea of um, you know, the pleasure of the majority or the good of the majority and
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe
Sometimes that principle of humanity, that formula for humanity, seems to conflict with the formula of universal law.
and then in those cases it would say you would follow universal law and not that of
Yes. Yeah, that's the first precept, that's the first maxim. And
yeah.
remember, utilitarianism is for the purpose of the good and the pleasure of the whole.
Mhm.
It also like it again, Kant is very clear, other utilitarianisms are very clear. It's the good is pleasure and happiness, which isn't a bad thing, but if that's your only goal.
Yeah. Well, Aristotle would say those who simply seek pleasure are no different from cows grazing in the field. And
Yeah.
Aristotle will call us to something higher than pleasure, which is a good transition, I know.
According to Aristotle, Kant is a cow.
Well, I think according to more than just Aristotle, or more people than just Aristotle.
Yeah. Let's talk about Aristotle now.
Yeah,
Some,
well, I think one quick relation between Kant and Aristotle. I think Kant tends to focus more on like the whole of society. He looks at more like humanity instead of specific people. Aristotle, I think, is the reverse. So when Aristotle developed what we know as virtue ethics, right? And those are about oneself coming to the good, not oneself being a part of the good or contributing to the good. It's sort of that um I think it takes a bit from, he learned from Plato the whole journey out of the cave almost.
yeah. Now,
Um
quick caveat: Aristotle didn't call it virtue ethics. Neither did Plato or most of the ancient Greeks. It was just how ethics
mhm.
was
Yeah.
built around this
And
idea.
so
We kind
so
of added
essentially,
the label in the mid 1900s was when
mhm.
we added this label of virtue ethics, as opposed to utilitarianism ethics, as opposed to what this, that, or the other thing. It's a
Yeah.
label that we added that some people are like, no, Aristotle never wrote on virtue ethics. He did. It just was what ethics was at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, so he wrote the Nicomachean Ethics, which was, his he sort of founded the study of ethics and philosophy. And essentially, I think the fundamental premise he starts from is that there is this thing, the good, right? It's sort of this abstract concept, but there is the good, and we can know what the good is, and we can move towards it, or we can move away from it, essentially. And typically, all of our actions are directed towards some sort of good, right? So there's the good with capital G, and then there's lots of other sort of secondary and tertiary goods. So every action we do is directed towards some sort of good, and sometimes we put goods in the wrong place in sort of a hierarchy of goods, right? So you have the good, and then there's a hierarchy form. So there are lesser goods and greater goods, and it's sort of wrong for us to put a lesser good above a greater good, say.
Yeah.
So essentially, but he starts off with the fundamental sort of assumption and I guess axiom that the good exists and we can know it, right? So then when we know the good and we act towards it, that's called the cognition of the good into right action. That's the definition of the virtue of prudence, which is the queen of all virtues, right? So the good exists, we know the good, we act towards the good. right? And that's prudence. It's the fundamental virtue. You need prudence in order to do any good actions, essentially. So then once you've done that good action, sometimes you're acting towards the good and something gets in the way of it. You need to know, or another person gets in the way of it, right? You need to know how to properly judge when to act towards the good, right? So the giving situations, giving people, giving different things their due in relation to your action, that's the virtue of justice, right? So you act towards the good, then the thing that governs your action towards the good is the virtue of justice. You can't have justice if you don't have right action yet, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And then when it's hard to do that, because sometimes you know what you have to do, you know how you have to do it, but it's just hard. It's going to be tough, right? You need the virtue of fortitude then steps in and sort of guides you and helps you to continue to do what's right always, right? So you have prudence. So this is the hierarchy of the cardinal virtues, right? Prudence is first because it's knowing and acting upon the good. Justice governs that action and directs it properly towards the people around you and towards the end that you're directing towards. Fortitude supports you so that you can continue to do that. And then temperance makes sure that you don't overdo it, right? Because he sees virtue as the balance between two extremes, right?
Yeah, golden mean.
Yeah, the goal. So you can have courage, which is the ballast between cowardice and recklessness, let's say, right? If you just standing up for what's right is always good, but then if you stand up for what's right at your mother-in-law's funeral and start yelling at your in-laws or something, that's just recklessly stupid. Like, now's not the time. You're putting some other
Push back on that. I feel like that would actually be an example of injustice and not so much.
Okay, yeah, but yeah, no, that's fair.
Still an imbalance, but which virtue you're heinously overdoing, I think I'd disagree.
Yeah, well, okay, no, that's true. So the definition of temperance usually, or a typical one, is selfless self-preservation, right?
Yeah.
So like the charging into battle, if it's just you against an army, running at the army and getting shot, like, you're not doing any good. Maybe it's a brave thing you did, but it's also a stupid thing, and you shouldn't do that. You should be temperate about when you charge in. You should be smart about it.
Captain America, when he fixes his shield and picks up Thor's hammer, stands against Thanos and his entire army. Before that,
but again,
behind him,
you're not Captain America.
Captain America was being virtuously courageous or recklessly bold and brash and intemperate.
Yeah, well, he picked up Thor's hammer, so he must be super virtuous there. So we're erring on the side of him being courageous.
You know what? He might have killed Thanos in that charge. He might have.
Yeah. Well, the charge did end up with the death of Thanos, so
that is true.
But yeah. So those are the cardinal virtues, right? And when we're talking about virtue in an Aristotelian sense, we're talking about a habituated good action, right? So it's not, you can have a virtuous act, which is an act that is directed properly or it's acted upon and directed properly towards the good. And then personally, when you have a virtue, it's when that action has become sort of part of you. It's become part of your character. And the way you do that is by habituating it.
Yeah. A disposition is the word that a lot of
yes. And it's not just a natural disposition, right? The more you do something, the more you're going to do that thing. That's kind of a tautology or tautology.
Yeah.
Tautology, yeah. So the more you do something, the more you do something, right? The more you wake up, and like say, the more you get out of bed early, the more you're going to be waking up early and getting out of bed early. So when you it sort of becomes a second nature for you to do the good thing, to do the just thing, to do the prudent thing, to do the temperate thing, and when you sort of gain in knowledge of the good as you do it, and you can move towards it more smoothly. So that's the basis of, I guess, Aristotelian virtue ethics, if you want to call it that.
I've always really liked the idea of the golden mean of
Mhm,
virtue. I'm an archer. I've been teaching archery since I was 14. 15 was when I started teaching kids how to shoot at a summer camp.
mhm.
And um, it's funny, and Aristotle describes it like this: if you are somebody who struggles with cowardice, it is better for you to start acting recklessly and overshooting the mean, and then undershooting and overshooting until you get closer to that center of courage. And it's like, if I have a camper or a kid who is consistently shooting uh, left and low of the bullseye, I'm going to aim him and tell him to shoot right and up of the bullseye.
Mhm.
He'll probably still miss the bullseye, but he'll actually be closer to the bullseye than he was when he was shooting left and low.
Yeah.
It's like, cool, we're closer. Now let's kind of adjust it back to left and low a little bit, not too much, but a little bit. And then we're really just outside of the bullseye. It's almost there. Then you just have to adjust a little bit right and up again,
Mhm.
and you're nailing the bullseye. And that's kind of how these virtues work when you're building them.
Yeah.
Is
Like you're training your fine motor skills every time you're doing that.
yeah.
Um,
But for someone trying to grow in purity, the big thing is like, if or to grow in virtue, the big thing would be to take what you're struggling in and overcompensate it, and then kind of just keep trying to balance it out until you get to that center and that golden mean that Aristotle talks a lot about.
yeah, yeah. Um,
So virtue
that's,
ethics,
that's important. I don't think it really uh, conflicts with Kant a terrible amount. They have different focuses, but
yeah,
right. So, sometimes, um, right, the principle of double effect, which was developed out of sort of Aristotelian virtue, and just historically the way that happened was Aristotle had a big influence on the scholastics, and double effect sort of came into full development through this, from my understanding, through the scholastics, or was it before with Augustine?
I think it's Aquinas.
Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking. So he was in the scholastic period. So with Aquinas, um, essentially what he said, the principle of double effect comes down to saying, one, the act itself must be morally good or at least indifferent. Two, the agent may not positively will the bad effect, but may permit it. If he could attain the good effect without the bad effect, he should do so. The bad effect is sometimes said to be indirectly voluntary. Right? Three, the good effect must flow from the action, at least as immediately in order of causality, not necessarily in order of time. Um, in other words, the good effect must be produced directly by the action and not by the bad effect. Otherwise, the agent would be using a bad means to a good end, which is never allowed. And the good effect must be sufficiently desirable to compensate for allowing the bad effect. Right. So, what does this mean?
Yeah, we kind of jumped into the parts of principle of double effect without actually talking about what it is.
Yeah.
So we should probably do that. The
Okay.
principle of
So,
double effect, for those who are unfamiliar with it, it is a Catholic Christian way of defining and looking at morality. Just like with what virtue ethics were, we were just talking about virtue. Virtue ethics, the fundamental portion of it is the morally good thing is essentially what the virtuous person would do, what the prudent person would do, what the just person would do. And you come to know it by acting virtuously. If you have true prudence, you should always be able to choose the moral action, or at least aim towards it. And then with true justice, be able to choose how to do it. With true temperance, know all of that stuff. But virtue ethics basically builds all of its questions of morality on what would the person truly virtuous do.
mhm.
And then the question is, can we actually have a virtuous society? And that's maybe a topic for a later podcast, because that's a whole can of worms in and of itself. But what the principle of double effect does, and it's not a means of an entire like code of morality. It actually pulls a little bit of utilitarianism. It pulls a little bit of virtue ethics. It's the beautiful thing about Catholicism is we take the best ideas from different things and then we like turn them towards Christ and elevate them, and it works wonderfully.
Baptism.
So there isn't really a Catholic philosophical moral ethic study. There are things in utilitarianism that we use and that are good, like the formula of humanity. There are things in virtue ethics, more things in virtue ethics, I'd say, that are good and that we pull towards. But the principle of double effect is essentially a very specific question that is, when an action can cause an evil thing and a good thing, can you do that action?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If somebody is pointing a gun at me and I shoot them, can I do that action as a Catholic, as a morally Catholic option? Can I defend myself? Can a soldier go to war? Can a mother who needs a surgery while she's pregnant, but that surgery might kill the child, but if she doesn't have the surgery, she's dead. Can she have that surgery? What do you do if the train is coming down the tracks and it's about to kill 10 people, but if you divert it, it would kill 3? All of those questions actually fall under this principle of double effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because every action we do, right? So Aristotle began by saying every action is directed towards an end. But every action we do doesn't just have one effect. It can have multiple effects. Something the principle of double effects takes into account is intention. And this is, I think, what confuses a lot of people about it, right? Because the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And sometimes the principle of double effect can seem to be saying that if your intentions are good, you can deal with a bad effect, which isn't 100% correct. But it can seem that way, right? So we say every action is directed towards an end. So if I do an act with an end for me to have a morally good action, right? I need to do something that's morally good or morally neutral or indifferent, right? And there be a good end, right? So the means towards the end is good or indifferent, and the end is good or indifferent, right?
And the intention is good.
Yeah, and the intention is good or indifferent. Yeah. You need to have all.
All 3 for it to be a morally good act.
Mm-hmm. So when we say we have a good intention, right? Saving your own life, preserving your life. That's a good intention. We have a morally neutral action of pulling a trigger, right? That you can go to the range and pull a trigger, right? Yeah. So shooting a gun is not a morally wrong act, right? But then the end, right? And there is the effect, though, of killing a person, right? So the person's about to mug you or stab you, and you pull out your gun and you shoot them, right? The action you're doing is shooting your gun. The end is you're alive, you're not being stabbed, and the person is dead, right? And your intention, right? If you're like, oh, this guy is terrible and I want to kill them, like you want the excuse for them to attack you so you can kill them. We can say that actually wasn't a good act, right?
Yeah. But if the intention was entirely to protect yourself or protect somebody beside you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So number one, right, the act itself must be good or at least indifferent, right? So we can't be doing a bad action for a good end. That's not what the principle of double effect says, right? You can't, what's an inherently bad action?
I think stealing maybe is an obvious one.
Yes, so, or lying, right? Lying is a great one, right? The question of the Nazis knock on your door and they say, are there any Jews in the house? Right? This whole scenario.
I push back, but that's because lying has different definitions, and depending on your definition of lying.
Well, then you're playing a semantic game.
Oh, 100%. But that semantic name would say that uh, lying would be withholding truth from somebody who deserves to know it, and the Nazi has no right to know if you have Jews in your basement. So it's actually okay to not tell.
I don't think that's what lying is, though. Right? Because lying, I think, is possibly telling a falsehood.
There's a lot of argument between.
Yeah, I know, but I think that's a cheap out for the actual dilemma, right?
I'm okay with in that situation. I'm okay with the cheap out, but neither of us
no, because I mean, let's take that and expand it for a second and say,
are we going to universalize it like Kant?
yeah, and let's say if is in every situation, can you mislead somebody who doesn't have the right to know? Right? So, hey, are you going out with your friend tonight? Right? I don't actually have the right to know that. And you saying, no, I'm not, when you are, that's a lie.
Yeah.
like in every other situation that we would consider that a lie. We might consider it a white lie, right? I think that's the definition of a white lie. It's not like a material lie or something.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have the right to know what shoes I'm wearing right now, but if I tell you I'm wearing Jordans, right, that's still a lie.
You don't own Jordans, so I
yeah,
know.
no, exactly. Like,
yeah.
So I just disagree with that definition of a lie, right?
I think we should have another podcast online.
Okay, yeah, we do that. But
like thinking on which philosopher actually like establishes those principles of falsehood. So I don't want to poorly quote him or misquote him, but we should talk about that later.
Yeah, but that being said, you're telling something that is not truthful. I think generally that's considered to be wrong because it's not truthful. And if we say that you say, for the sake of argument, every time you say something untruthful, that's wrong, right? You're not directed towards the good. And somebody with malicious intent, say, or even not so much with a malicious intent, like knocks on your door and says, like, are there Jews in the basement? This would actually say that the principle of double effect, right? You couldn't actually lie. Oftentimes there's great ways around this in this moral dilemma, but it's still the dilemma is that, like, yeah, if this thing is wrong, if telling falsehood,
really witty conversationalist, there's a lot of ways out of this dilemma. If you're not good at that or scared out of your mind because the Nazis are knocking on your door, this is essentially meaningless, and I would still just go for the lie. But you have to determine if you are good enough at BSing. But yeah.
So when we're saying just hypothetically, the act itself must be good and neutral. So the two burning buildings is a good example, right?
Yeah.
Two buildings, they're both on fire, and there's a person in each one of them, right? Now, when you choose to, and you run into one, they're both about to collapse. You have like a minute or something. You run into one, you grab the person, you pull them out, and both buildings come down, right? So your action or inaction resulted in the death of the person in the other building, right? Like it did. Or your inaction did. You could have saved that other person, right? Right. It wasn't your direct action that caused it.
But didn't kill the person.
You didn't kill the person. So could we say that you have any more that you're morally at fault for that person dying? It's like, no, we won't, right? Because your action, right, had a good end, right? You went in, you saved, or even say there's a board, or there's a board you have to move in the burning building, right? And that's going to make the building fall down. But both of the people are trapped, sort of unconscious. So you move the board, you grab one, and it collapses behind you. So your action of moving that board did technically kill the second person, right?
Yeah, but
it resulted in it. But one. So this is where intention is important. You did not intend the death of the other person. You intended to actually save both of them if you could, but you couldn't. So you met your limit of ability. Your action was moving the board was actually a morally neutral action. There's nothing inherently wrong with moving a burning board. And the end of it was to save somebody, which you actually ended up doing. Right? There was the negative side effect, right? There was that effect that had nothing to do with your intention. It was maybe caused. It was caused in result of your. It was a result of one of your actions, right? It was a double effect of your action. Your action, you saved one, and you resulted in the death of another. But we would say that that's actually a morally good action. The end's morally good, the means morally neutral, at least, and your intention was good, right? So now, if we were to change that situation, right, and say like we needed to take one of them, and what would a and we needed to deliberately kill one of them to save the other, right? So you need to take one of them and throw them over the fire to get out, right? To make like a bridge. So,
to get to the one guy, you need to throw the board in the way of the other guy.
Yeah. That is an action, or that's directly resulting in the death of another, right?
Yeah, the causation is not at that. The immediate causation is not the saving of the life; it's the killing of another.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they
right.
those.
So I mean, we're kind of shying away from the abortion topic, but this is the most.
I don't know why we were shying. I didn't think we were shying away from it. I was
wondering, but abortion is where we see the principle of double effect almost like playing in action, right? So we'll say like when it comes to abortion, there's a mother who has to have like chemotherapy, right? And we would say it's like early first trimester, the mother's gonna die from chemotherapy, or the mother's gonna die without chemotherapy, and like it's really fast progressing cancer. Isn't morally right but if the mother takes chemotherapy, right, the child will die, or the unborn baby will die. Is it morally right for the mother to take chemotherapy?
Yes.
Yeah, we would say it's not morally right necessarily, but morally permissible, right? You're allowed, because the intention is to save your life. If you don't do it,
and the action you're taking, doing the chemotherapy, you are not directly. It'd be different if you have like the opposite spectrum would be if a doctor is like, hey, you won't survive this pregnancy, so you should have an abortion so that you live. Having the abortion is morally wrong, and the killing of the child is the first cause. The saving of the life is the secondary cause. In the other way, the chemotherapy is saving the mother as the first cause. The secondary cause is the child.
Yes. So that goes with principle 3, right? The good effect must flow from the action, at least immediately, right? And that action, right, has to be good or neutral, right? So chemotherapy, we can say, is good or neutral, and the good effect is coming from the chemotherapy, the health of the mother, right? It is, we can say, killing an unborn child or killing a born child. Even if you say, like, say there's, in another medical example, you have one person who's dying, or you have two people who are dying. They're both still alive, though, right? And one of them is dying from a lung disease, but has a really good liver, and the other one's dying from a liver disease, right? So there's more of a chance that if you realize that their blood types match, you can take the liver from one, killing him, and give it to the other, right? So you kill one of the patients to save the second patient, right? We would say that's always morally impermissible. That's moral wrong, right? Because even though you have a good end saving this person, and even like a relatively good like good intention too, right? You can't deliberately kill another patient to save the life. right? And it comes down, and it can seem kind of extreme, right? So if there's one disabled child, say, and somebody gives you a gun and say, shoot that child in the head, or else everybody in the world will die, right? It's actually a morally impermissible, if that kid isn't causing the death of everybody else, or it's actually a morally impermissible act to do that, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, yeah. Do you have anything else to add? I mean, there's a lot more we can go on. I think
We keep choosing very big subjects and then being like 45 minutes tops. But no, I think that we covered it pretty well. Yeah.
This is something we can definitely do another podcast on a little later. We might I mean, for if anybody's listening, I don't even know if anybody listens to these.
Yeah. Did we get any on the first episode?
Good 5 views. So
Oh, I feel sorry.
That's we're doing it. But I mean, in these early episodes, it's really us trying to learn how to podcast and how to have these conversations, because it's not as easy as it looks. trying to articulate and organize our thoughts.
This is like my 6th glass of whiskey at this point. I just, no.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for listening. This has been Castles and the Globe with Alessandro Danselmi and John F. Rice. We hope that you continue to listen. Tell your friends about us. And I think we have an email, right? That if they have questions, you said you were going to set up an email.
Oh, yes, we do have an email.
We do have an email. So what's that email, Sandro?
It's castlesintheglobe@gmail.com. I'll put in the description.
Castlesintheglobe@gmail.com. If you have questions, suggestions, just want to tell us how amazing Sandro looks and how great my beard is, we'll listen to all of that. So we look forward to hearing from you guys, and we will see you next week.
Okay. Bye.